Welcome to Evil Podcast, a horror fiction podcast. In the special Halloween episode, I have two stories for you, both from published authors. That's right, actual horror writers contributed their stories for this special episode. The first story is Charlie's Lunch by Kevin Wallis. It was in the publication of Beneath the Surface of Things that can be found on Amazon. The publisher was Bars and Sages Publishing. You can find them at bardandsages.com. The second story is The Janitor by Jeani Rector. Now, Jeani is the founder and editor of The Horizon. You can find that at thehorizon.com, an online horror magazine. So enjoy this extended version of Evil Podcast and have a happy Halloween. Now, on to the stories. Charlie's Lunch by Kevin Wallis. When the first person disappeared from the cafe, Charlie thought he might vomit. 1 minute a man, young, black, heavily goateed, sat in the corner booth, his laptop humming. The next, he was gone. Just gone. The booth was empty, no computer, no lunch. Charlie was about to finish his chicken panini when he glimpsed the vanishing act from the corner of his eye. He hadn't even realized he had been aware of the black man's presence before. Yet the sudden disappearance from his peripheral vision kick-started the sense of recall. The man had been sitting in that empty booth not 2 seconds before. His food froze in his throat and refused to advance. He raised his glass to his lips, but the water trembled too violently. He couldn't drink enough to swallow the chicken. He lowered the glass, used both hands to steady it on the table, and spat the panini into his napkin. He scanned the diner for signs of other patrons had noticed the disappearance. But life proceeded as normal in the brightly lit confines of the diner. An elderly pair sat in the corner, forcing bites of food into their 3 toddlers' mouths. A young couple held hands at the table at Charlie's right and gazed into each other's eyes as only newlyweds can. Several well-coiffed men, all with monogrammed briefcases by their sides, dined by themselves, chatting on cell phones or impatiently hailing the waitress. Other than his shaking hands and the pestering urge to spray the bites of lunch he'd already eaten back onto his plate, everything seemed status quo. A gust of wind swept across his back. Icy tendrils ripped his flesh even through his flannel shirt. His heart trip-hammered into a frantic flutter. Throwing in the towel, his stomach regurgitated half a chicken sandwich into Charlie's hastily raised salad bowl. Calm down. Just calm down. It's only a breeze. Must be the hangover. 6 pints in 3 hours last night, remember? You imagined the man. He was never there. This time, Charlie knew he didn't imagine it. A hole as black as fresh tar materialized in the air behind the young bride to his right, and the woman was pulled, sucked backwards, her body folded at the waist as if it wrenched towards the hole by some enormous unseen hook. Her mouth open, but the hole closed before any sound escaped. No sign it had ever existed remained behind. Charlie braced himself for the groom's screams, the inevitable panicked hysteria. But the young man sat slurping his soup as calmly as the rest of the diner's guests. The groom's brow creased as he noticed Charlie's wide-eyed stare. Then he rotated his chair away from Charlie and continued his lunch. Charlie's limbs turned wooden. His eyes locked onto the couple's table. The woman's purse, her lunch plate, the glass, were gone. Damn, it's cold in here. Charlie closed his eyes, covered them with his hands, searched inside for a hint of machismo, just enough to steady the trembling. But the people don't vanish unless you're crazy, or everyone else is. Maybe all men feel this way. Want to scream and cry and piss their pants when the tangible world decides to change its laws without the courtesy of a warning. I am not a coward. Charlie rose, knocking his chair against the wall. Did you not see that? He yelled. The clinking of silverware and the hum of conversation ceased. Faces turned towards him, some with eyebrows raised, others with furrowed brows. Did nobody see those people? A man, a black man, right there in that booth. Gone. He pointed at the younger man. Your wife. She was your wife, right? Where did she go? Are you drunk? She's gone, man. I don't have a wife, Bunny. Why don't you just calm down? She was... He paused. An image flitted through his mind, danced around his memory. A woman in white, black hair shining blue under an August sun, taking his hand, placing a ring. A hand clasped Charlie's shoulder. He spun around, shrieking. The waitress stared calmly back at him. Whoa, sugar, she said, winking a warm blue eye. You're going to scare my customers, and I need those tips, you know. The diner still glared at him. Some of the businessmen snickered. The elderly couple smiled before returning to the kids. Eased into the chair by the waitress's hand, Charlie muttered an apology and tried to slow his ragged breathing. The waitress smiled and placed a cup on his table. Thought I'd offer you some coffee, she said. Just brewed it myself. Did you see? Gotta go, honey. Just me in here today. As she walked away, she turned her head and stole a swift glance back at Charlie. The kindness in her eyes had disappeared, replaced with a grave look of concern. Drink your coffee now, she said. I made it just for you. Then she was through the kitchen doors and barking orders at the chef. Charlie stared at the coffee. Numbness settled into him. The unreality of barely remembering dreams. He brought the coffee to his lips but stopped just shy of taking a sip, setting the cup back on the table. Charlie looked closely at the contents. He questioned the legitimacy of whatever this place served, and if their hallucinogen of choice dissolved readily. He wouldn't be able to see it in his coffee, tea, or whatever else this insane diner tried to force on him. I'm not drinking anything from this place. I'm out of here. He figured his first stop would be to the closest shrink he could find. He never made it to the door. The fountain drink nozzles and hanging glasses behind the old lady at the counter blurred, as if the air around them had suddenly become filmy and polluted. A dime-sized spot of blackness appeared at the center of the haze. A blast of icy wind swept through the diner, so fierce and violent that Charlie could actually see the frozen air being sucked into the hole. As the gale strengthened, the hole enlarged until it enveloped the grandmother within its ebony borders. The lady's arm shot outward. Her head nearly crashed into her knees as she flew into the air. Hands emerged from the hole. Withered, seeking hands. They clawed at the woman's gray hair, ripped at her flesh, pulled her in. Charlie tried to shout a warning, but the grandmother was gone before he could open his mouth. Then the blackness silently slammed shut, leaving nothing but a slight ripple in the air and the remnants of an Arctic gust. Charlie's legs tingled, shook, then collapsed. He fell back into the chair and his vision swam. When it cleared, the old man sat alone. No wife, no grandkids, nobody. The grandfather took a bite of toast, noticed the empty chair next to him, and pushed it beneath the table. Charlie knew he should run, shout, cry, do something, but he only stared at the old man, his jaw slack. The air around Charlie solidified into a block of ice. The small portion of his brain not consumed with terror knew this was not literally so. He could still breathe, after all. Yet his breath came in short, gasping wheezes, firing from his mouth in clouds, fighting against the glacial temperature that assaulted him. The waitress burst from the kitchen, sprinted towards him with fear in her clear blue eyes. She shouted unintelligibly and pointed at something on Charlie's table. In seconds, she was there, snatching the cup of coffee from the table and hurling it at the scalding liquid at his chest. Charlie started to scream in pain, but something yanked him backward, snatching his body's reservoir of air. The waitress, diner, and all its inhabitants vanished, replaced with a darkness blacker and colder than a polar midnight. The blackness was infinite. No land, no sky, no borders to distinguish terrain in any kind. just black. He couldn't even tell whether his eyes were open or closed, until the first of the wraiths swarmed him. These he could see, and he felt his mind start to bend, break. They poured forth from the darkness, their flowing, wispy bodies floating above him, below him, everywhere, illuminating both themselves and their surroundings with a ghastly blue glow. Charlie could only make out two discernible features, incandescent blue eyes and twisted, clawed hands ending in outstretched talons. Charlie closed his eyes and waited to die. Nothing happened. The cold seeped into him, sent him into trembling seizures. Charlie forced his eyes open again. The things hovered above him, swirling about in such frenzied patterns that they seemed to meld into one enormous glowing figure. Charlie felt them studying him. Their probing blue eyes, bluer than the most brilliant sapphire. He risked turning his head to assess his surroundings, using the glow emanating from the phantoms for light, and screamed the scream of a lunatic. Bodies thrashed everywhere, human bodies, some pale and sobbing, most waiting in terror as the wraiths swarmed them. The black man from the diner floated by, inches from Charlie, drool slinking through his thick goatee, his eyes lifeless, vacant. One of the specter's gnarled hands carried the man through what passed for an obsidian sky in this world. Farther away, but still horribly visible, a single wraith grasped both the young newlywed and the elderly lady by the hair, skimming its way past dozens, hundreds of withering bodies. With strength born of panic, his feet flailing, floating, scrabbling for purchase on an unseen and insubstantial ground, Charlie leapt up and fled away from the wraiths above him, towards others, always towards others, no matter which direction he turned. His lungs threatened to explode from fighting against the cold for air. Shoving his way past throngs of captives and phantasms, he skidded to a stop and froze. Before him another hole, this one slicing its way through the blackness. Brilliance poured forth, blinding Charlie as his eyes tried to forget the darkness and remember the light. When his eyes adjusted, Charlie looked through the hole into a hospital room. A woman, sweating and grunting with the exertion of childbirth, lay on the bed while doctors and nurses put finishing touches on the delivery. The baby emerged purple, bloody, and opened its mouth. Before the newborn could let loose its welcoming cry to the world, a wraith carrying a pale, obese man darted towards the hole. Its decrepit hand reached into the fat man's chest, ripped out what looked like a transparent white sheet, and launched its claw toward the baby. The ghostly sheet shot from the outstretched talon, shriveled and blackened mid-flight, and flew into the baby's mouth an instant before the child's scream filled the air. The hole closed, and Charlie was once more surrounded by demons. They swarmed with renewed frenzy. Charlie had no strength left to run as the wraiths hurled towards him. Claws groped, eyes burned. The first to reach him wrapped its insubstantial arms around him, and flew backwards as if countless volts of electricity had seared its immaterial being. A shrill, gurgling whistle flooded the air, an ear-burning shriek Charlie had heard in as anger or pain or both. The wraiths raced around each other, their loathing, star-bright eyes never leaving Charlie's. One of them pointed. The whistling grew deafening, and Charlie was ripped backwards once more, through a newly opened hole, into a small, unfamiliar room. He lay on a leather couch, shivering with remembered cold. The sweat of fear plastered his clothes to his skin. The smell of freshly baked bread and the tinkle of silverware drifted through the air. He bolted upright, preparing to crash through the walls if necessary in order to escape. But the waitress, smiling sweetly and watching him from a desk in the corner, halted him. "You're fine now," the waitress said. "No sugars, no honeys, just a soft, matter-of-fact voice that sang through Charlie's ears. They sent you back. You're in my office." Rising from her chair, she offered Charlie a cup. "Here, drink this." Charlie's mind demanded that he refuse, but exhaustion trumped logic. He took the cup. "Nothing weird, I promise," the waitress said with a grin. "It'll calm you." Charlie took a sip and felt the warm tea soothe his still frigid insides. He sighed, leaned back against the couch, and realized he did feel better. Not great by any means, but better. "What?" he began, but found he did not even know what to ask, where to begin. The waitress pulled her chair up to the couch and placed a hand on Charlie's leg. "They take souls," she said. "They take good people from this world, taint and decay their souls with evil, and place them back into circulation." He remembered the white substance turning black mid-flight, disappearing inside the baby's mouth. When Charlie offered no reply, she continued, "They think they can flood the world with their vileness, but we have our own agents. For every soul they steal from the good, we take one from their forces and imbue it with our own spirit. Thus the cycle goes on, never ending, never a victor. It's why they attack this place. I think they know I'm here, that I attract the good in the world. So this place is a feeding ground for them. But I can't save everybody. I only got to you because I noticed you could see them." Charlie sat up, the tea dissolving his numbness and granting him some fledgling clarity. He searched the waitress's eyes for signs of condescension or mischief. He found only truth. "Why didn't they kill me?" he asked, but the answer came to him before she could answer. His hand drifted to his chest, felt the forgotten blisters. "The coffee. You threw the coffee on me." "I had to," she said. "You weren't going to drink it." She laughed at Charlie's confusion. "It's brewed with holy water. It repels them." "But the people, they disappeared. No one even noticed." "They never existed," the waitress said, sounding as if she spoke to a child. "Once they're taken, it's like they were never on this plane at all. Husbands married for years find themselves suddenly wondering why they never found that perfect someone. Loving parents begin to grieve at their incurable barrenness. And no one misses them because they were never here. It happens every day, all the time. You," her voice trailed off. Charlie hung his head and tried to wrap his mind around the direction his life has taken in the past hour. They were never here. He remembered that elderly man at the counter. His nonchalance when his wife and grandchildren, a wife he never married, grandchildren he never had, vanished. Charlie looked up and urged the waitress on. "They took your wife 5 minutes before they took you." Shudders racked him. He felt his loose grip on reality start to disintegrate further. A wife. He grasped for her. Forced open doors he had never asked to close. Felt her smile, her smooth black hair. Then nothing. "I was never married," he said in a shaky whisper. "I was never married." The waitress looked chagrined. "I shouldn't have told you. I'm sorry. But you saw them. You saw those people disappear, so I thought maybe you knew. I think a part of you did remember your wife, so you could see all the others. Most people can't see. The day's horrors, vanishing people who never were, demon-eyed phantasms, the baby, dear God, the baby." Charlie placed his head in his hands and sobbed. The waitress sighed. "And this is why people shouldn't see." She took the cup from Charlie's hand and walked back to the desk, grabbing another pot of steaming drink. She poured a little into a cup. Returning to the still mumbling Charlie, she put the cup to his lips. "I don't know why you could see them, but I hoped it meant you could help. It gets lonely here." She poured a dab of the new tea into Charlie's trembling mouth and laid him gently onto the sofa. Charlie slept. He awoke at peace, an aura of contentment embracing him, but had no idea where he was. He lay on an unfamiliar couch in an unfamiliar room. A woman, slight and pretty, her dress declaring her a waitress, sat next to him, smiling through deep blue eyes. "Feeling better, sugar? You had quite the fall there." "What?" "You passed out. Spilled hot coffee all over yourself." "I hope it wasn't my service that got you so worked up." Her smile broadened. Charlie lifted his shirt and ran his fingers across his red and blistered skin. A tickle at the back of his mind told him he was missing something. Something about the coffee. "If you're feeling better now, sugar, I have a lot of customers out there," the waitress said. "Think you can show yourself out?" "Sure," he said. Thanks." "Don't mention it." She rose to leave. "No, wait," Charlie stopped her. "I mean, thanks for something. I feel like he almost said, "I owe you my life." But the sheer lunacy of this refused to exit his mouth. The waitress leaned towards him and lifted his chin so that his eyes met hers. "Don't mention it." She turned and left. Charlie rose, exited the office, and made his way through the diner. Half a dozen customers occupied the small restaurant, chatting and laughing. Husbands wrapped arms around wives. Mothers fed the little ones, while scolding the oldest. Some sat alone and looked content. Others exuded loneliness, even amongst company. They're all just living. They have no clue. He shook his head as if trying to empty it in such ideas and wondered where that thought came from. He paused at the door and looked back at the waitress. She was bent over a table, taking an order. She turned towards Charlie, smiled, and winked. So blue, Charlie thought. I've never seen eyes that blue. So angelic. He shook his head once more and left the diner, scolding himself for such ridiculous flights of fantasy. He rubbed his skin beneath his shirt, and for reasons unknown, Charlie thought of war. And that was Charlie's Lunch by Kevin Wallis. You can find it in Beneath the Surface of Things, from Bards and Sages Publishing. And a special thanks to Julianne Dawson, owner of Bards and Sage Publishing, for sending me that. Again, you can find them at bardsandsages.com. That was our first of two stories. A quick break before we get to the second story. Evil Podcast is made possible by the generosity of its listener. In order to support Evil Podcast, I have a favor to ask of you. If you can subscribe to a horror podcast on whatever podcast player you use, that would be great. If you could rate and review on that as well, that would be fantastic. And still even better, if possible, if you can support us financially, a small amount a month, even $1 would help. You can do that through patreon.com/evilpodcast, or simply go to evilpodcast.com and hit the Patreon button. We do have rewards for our Patreons, and I do thank them dearly. Now let's get on to our second story. Our next story is called The Janitor. It was written by Jeani Rector. Now, Jeani is the editor and founder of the Horror Zine, and that's at thehorrorzine.com. The Horror Zine is an award-winning online magazine, and as the name says, it has plenty of horror stories. So if you're a fan of horror, and if you're listening to this, I know you are, go check out thehorrorzine.com. That's thehorrorzine.com. And here's our second story. The Janitor by Jeani Rector. Craig parked in the empty lot and got out of his car, his windshield reflecting the glare of the brightly lit school sign. He was tired. Somehow, his Monday night shift had come too soon. He studied the school as he walked towards it. High school kids had to be the messiest people on the planet. He knew if he had paid attention and worked harder during his own high school days, he'd have a better job than this by now. But he hadn't, so this was the result. Make the best of things, his mother always said. Being a janitor is an honest living. Yeah, and all good dogs go to heaven. Craig took the large yellow cleaning can out of the closet and began to lug it towards the first classroom. It was about the size of an urban garbage can, made of hard plastic, and it was on wheels. It contained all the supplies he needed to do his job. He cleaned the brightly lit classrooms first. They were the easiest. The teachers always watched the students and made sure they didn't disrupt the rooms too badly. He moved on to the gymnasium, another fairly easy clean. After he did all he could in the gym, he knew it was time for the rest of his job. He stepped out into the night air, locked the gym door behind him, and started walking across the grassy quad towards the bathrooms, still lugging his cleaning supplies behind him. He hated cleaning the bathrooms the most. They were their own small buildings, boys on one side and girls on the other. Who knew what he would find there? Sometimes things he didn't even want to look at, much less touch, so he always left the bathrooms for last. Everything was locked at night, even the bathrooms. He started fumbling with the key ring as he walked, not seeming to find the right key when suddenly he understood why he was having so much trouble. He couldn't see the keys very clearly. Craig hesitated and glanced around. Why was it so dark? He looked ahead and noticed all the poles containing fluorescent lights that surrounded the freshman bathrooms were black. None of the lights were working. Everything seemed quiet, too quiet. The sense of stillness was overpowering. There was simply no sound, no motion, as if all the night creatures were silently hiding, watching and waiting. No crickets chirped, no owls screeched. The intense stillness was finally broken, and movement began again, as though the world was releasing the breath it held. A slight wind picked up. A creaking noise sounded as two twisted limbs of an old gnarled tree rubbed together in the soft breeze. The seed heads of ornamental grasses fluttered with sighing sound. Clipping boxwood shrubs rustled as branches shuddered in the wind. Craig felt spooked. He wished he had a flashlight, more for cold comfort than for the visuals it would give him. Everything seemed threatening in the dark. Every day, things seemed to take a sinister undertone. It was more of a mood than a lack of sight. He wanted to turn around and go home, but he knew he couldn't. He needed this job, as lousy as it was. He couldn't afford to lose it. You're not a little kid, afraid of your own shadow, he told himself. Buck up and be a man. So he started walking towards the bathrooms once again, resolving to clean them and then move on. It is what he did 5 nights a week. This night would be no different. So what if none of the lights were working? When he reached the overhang of the building, it seemed even darker under there. The roof shaded what little light the moon delivered. The bathroom building was brick. It felt cold to his touch as he leaned against it, fumbling for his keys. God, why couldn't he find the right key? Finally, he felt it, the small one with the knob on the tip. Next, he had to feel the door to find the keyhole. As his fingertips glided over the metal door jamb, he noticed how cold it was, colder than the brick. Maybe he had never noticed the temperature before, since he could normally see it and didn't have to feel it. The key connected with the lock, and Craig pushed open the door. He reached to the wall for the light switch. He found it and flipped it up. Nothing happened. The bathroom remained dark. No way was he going to a pitch-black bathroom. He'd have to call the school office in the morning and explain the situation, that he didn't feel safe because none of the lights were working. They couldn't fire him for that, could they? Craig began to turn around when he dropped his key ring. He cursed as he heard it bouncing into the bathroom, jangling as it tumbled and rolled, the keys end over end. Oh my God, I can't go in there. But his car keys were on that ring. Unless he retrieved them, he had to spend the night in the dark school grounds. Which fate was worse? He needed the keys. He knelt on the cement floor of the bathroom, feeling the coldness of the stone on his knees, all the way through his pants. He held the door open with his foot as he leaned over and began feeling around the cement floor, his fingers doing what his eyes could not, searching for the key ring. He realized that the keys must have fallen further into the room than he initially thought. He crawled forward, and his foot slipped from the door, and it slammed shut with a bang. Craig could not suppress a small scream before he realized that the door only locked from the outside. From the inside, it could be opened. He was not locked in. He noticed he was panting. Trying to slow his breathing, he gathered his wits about him, and once again began feeling over the cement floor for his key ring. I can do this. I'm not afraid of the dark. His fingers groped the cement, and he felt something on the floor that gave a little at his touch. Craig hesitated, and then touched the thing again. It felt wet, and... did he feel it move? A sour scent of musty brine assaulted his nostrils. Craig jerked his fingers back and decided to get the hell out of the bathroom, keys or no keys. He tried to rise to his feet, but his legs were like rubber beneath him. He staggered, his body rocked with fear. He made an attempt at reaching the door. He heard the thing slam against him more than he felt the blow, and understood that whatever was with him in the bathroom was big. He could hear someone sobbing and realized it was he who was doing the crying. "Please, God, get me out of here. Please, God, please, God." The creature dragged him down to the floor with his weight. He tried to push it off, but he couldn't seem to grasp it. The surface was slimy, and his hand slipped off. He tried again to shove the wet, cold bulk with all his might and finally made contact. His hand seemed to sink into the rubbery flesh that enveloped his fingers and didn't slow the assault. Stench of rotted seaweed and polluted ocean filled his nose, and his panic rose to desperation. He pulled back his arm and landed a punch on what he hoped was his face area. The thing grunted and made a growling sound. Craig tried to shove his forearm backwards because he knew that a sharp elbow could be an effective weapon. But he was disoriented in the dark and didn't know where to aim. He was aware of intense, searing pain. It felt like the creature was attacking him for an eternity, although what was left of his rational thoughts assured him it had only been a few seconds. He managed to roll out from the creature's grasp. He hoped with all his might that he was rolling in the right direction towards the door. He honestly didn't know. And suddenly, he felt the door, and he cried out loud with relief and renewed hope. He shoved the door open, and the cool outside air slapped his face. He staggered to his feet and began to run across the grassy quad, a loping, lopsided gait because his left leg wasn't functioning properly. He felt an adrenaline surge as he realized he was going to make it. He was going to escape whatever beast had been in the bathroom. He was going to survive. And then behind him, he heard the bathroom door open again as the thing came out. That was The Janitor by Jeani Rector. You can find more about Jeani at thehorrorzine.com. I want to thank you for listening to this special Halloween episode. Season 2 is due out in December. Again, if you can subscribe on whatever podcast player you have, that would be fantastic. If you can rate or review us, that'd be even better. And if you really enjoyed this, please do me a favor. Become a Patreon of ours. You can do that at patreon.com/evilpodcast. Or you can go to evilpodcast.com and hit the Patreon button there. More information about the authors and their stories and where to find them are in the show notes. Again, thank you for listening. And please, be good. Evil Podcast is written, produced, and narrated by Dennis Sarah, and is copyrighted by Dennis Sarah. Intro music is by Kevin MacLeod.